I'm Daniel Mercer, 32, the cousin no one expected to show up. The conference room was all polished glass and fake sincerity, one of those law firms downtown with white marble floors that echo too much. Everyone had already arrived when I stepped through the frosted doors, the ones etched with Hargrave and Locke. Estate services. I stood there for a second, just long enough to catch the hushed laughter before it stopped. There were a dozen of them. Aunts and uncles in muted blues and grays, cousins in tailored suits pretending they were grieving. No one looked at me directly, except for Aunt Lorraine, who tilted her chin up like I was a stain on the carpet. "Can I help you?" asked the woman behind the front desk. Not unkindly, but with that professional distance. She looked me up and down, plain button-down shirt, thrifted shoes, messenger bag. "I'm here for Malcolm Travers's will reading," I said, adjusting my grip on the strap. My palms were sweating. Her smile thinned. "And you are Daniel Mercer, his cousin." She blinked. Then her hands moved quickly, flipping through the guest list. You're not listed here. The appointment was made for immediate family and named beneficiaries." I heard someone chuckle behind me, the kind of laugh you don't have to see to recognize Brady, my older cousin. "Let him in," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I'm sure there's a seat in the back. Or the hallway. I'm not here to cause a scene." I told the receptionist quietly. "Just, could you check with Mr. Locke, the lawyer?" Before she could respond, Lorraine's voice cut in like a blade. "Honestly, Daniel, Malcolm barely knew you. You didn't even visit him at the hospice." "I had, but it was at night, when the others were gone." "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "If I'm not supposed to be here, I'll leave. But Malcolm invited me to this." "I have, sir." "I'm going to have to ask you to step back," the receptionist said, now more nervous than firm. "You can wait outside while I clarify," with her voice blurred out. I was already feeling that old heat rise in my ears, the kind that comes from trying to stand your ground in front of people who've already made up their minds about you. To anyone watching from home, if you've ever shown up somewhere you were supposed to belong, only to be told you didn't drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And if family drama has ever made you feel like a stranger in your own bloodline, hit like and subscribe. You're not alone. Just as I took a step back toward the elevator, someone called out Mr. Mercer. All heads turned. A tall man with silver hair and a tan briefcase was walking toward me from a side door. "Mr. Locke, I'm so sorry," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "We've been expecting you. Mr. Travers left specific instructions." He turned to the room. "Everyone, this is Daniel Mercer. He is not only listed in the will, but he is the only one Malcolm requested I speak to before beginning." Silence fell like an avalanche. Aunt Lorraine's face twisted. Brady's smirk cracked. Even Uncle Joel sat up straighter. Mr. Locke reached into his case. "And," he added, "Mr. Travers left behind a second envelope. It is sealed, and it is addressed to Mr. Mercer alone." My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out to take it. All eyes were on me now, and for once, they weren't looking past me. I held the envelope in my hand like it might burn me. Thick, cream-colored paper, sealed in deep red wax with Malcolm's old signet ring pressed into it. The room hadn't moved. No one breathed. No one shifted. Even the receptionist had stepped back into her chair, eyes darting between me and the lawyer like this was a courtroom drama. Mr. Locke cleared his throat. "If everyone would please take their seats. We'll begin the formal reading in just a moment. Daniel, you may stay here at the head table." It took everything in me not to look over at Brady as I passed his chair. His jaw tightened as I walked past. Aunt Lorraine whispered something sharp behind her hand to her husband. I didn't care to hear it. I sat down, suddenly aware of the tension in my shoulders, the way my heartbeat thudded in my fingertips. I placed the sealed envelope beside the cold pitcher of water, where everyone could see it. A signal. Maybe. A flag. Mr. Locke organized a few papers, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the will. It was the usual legal cadence. I, Malcolm Elias Travers, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I tuned most of it out. I knew how these things went. My mother used to say that when money is involved, family forgets what it means to be blood. To my cousin Brady, he left a framed photo of their ski trip to Banff, because he always said he wanted to remember the view more than the company. Laughter rippled down the table, forced and acidic. Brady's eyes narrowed. To Aunt Lorraine, a signed first edition of some obscure book Malcolm used to carry around in college. For the woman who taught me what pride looks like when it refuses to bow. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. The bequests continued: small items, books, memories, tokens of old jokes or buried insults dressed up in poetic phrasing. No one got land. No one got the house. No one got any real money. Until Mr. Locke paused. He looked up at me. And now, he said. We moved to the second envelope. A few chairs squeaked as people leaned forward. I could hear my own breath. He nodded toward me. Daniel, if you would please open the envelope and read it aloud. That was Mr. Travers's request. I didn't move at first. The wax was still unbroken. The weight of it, all years of being treated like the outsider. The odd one. The dropout who never had a plan rested in that seal. I broke it. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded once, thick with ink and age. I began to read. To Daniel. I always knew you'd be the last one to believe I remembered you. That's why you're the only one I trusted to read this out loud. They always told you that you were forgettable, that you were wasting time while they built legacies. But you were the only one who ever really saw me. You sat with me that night in the hospital, when I thought I was going to die, and no one else came. You brought me soup when I couldn't chew solid food, and you didn't flinch when I threw up on myself. You cleaned it. You said nothing. I left them the stories they wanted, the lies they can laugh at. But the truth, the real truth I'm giving to you, because you earned it. You are the sole inheritor of my estate, including all bank accounts, properties, shares, and personal assets. And because I know this will enrage them, I want it said out loud. For once, not behind closed doors. You deserved it more than any of them. Love, Malcolm. The letter trembled slightly in my hand. I couldn't stop reading it even after it ended. I could feel every gaze digging into me like arrows. Brady shot to his feet. That's not real. That's a forgery. It was verified by 3 separate legal witnesses. Mr. Locke cut in. Fingerprint authentication, voice recordings, and notarized documentation included. Mr. Travers made this his legal and binding decision. Aunt Lorraine's face was white. Her lips barely moved. All of it, she whispered. The house in Cape May, the inheritance from Malcolm's mother, his stocks, his business shares in the publishing firm. Everything, Mr. Locke said without looking up. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after glass breaks in a cathedral. A holy shock. I looked around. No one met my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. Just quiet. Uncle Joel muttered. He barely even knew the kid. Mr. Locke straightened a second folder in front of him. And yet, he said calmly, the kid showed up when none of you did. That seems to have made all the difference. I stood up slowly. The room didn't stop me. No one dared. I tucked the letter into my bag, my fingers brushing the frayed edge of an old notebook. I still carried Malcolm's notebook. As I reached the door, I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel. I turned. It was Mrs. Jennings, Malcolm's hospice nurse. Gray hair pulled into a bun, eyes that had seen too many endings. She handed me a small black box. He asked me to give you this after the reading. I took it, unsure of what to say. She nodded once. He said you'd understand. I left the law office and stepped into the sunlight. The city kept moving, cars honked, pigeons flapped, people laughed on patios. But for the first time in a long time, I felt still. I didn't open the black box until I got home. My apartment wasn't much: bare walls, hand-me-down furniture, and a kitchen that hummed from the old refrigerator trying its best not to die. I set the box on the table like it was sacred, and maybe it was. I sat in the rickety wooden chair by the window, the afternoon light streaking in through dusty blinds, and lifted the lid. Inside was a wristwatch. Not just any watch. Malcolm's watch. The one he always wore, even after the strap had cracked and the face was scratched from years of wear. It had an old leather band, darkened at the edges, and the dial still ticked faintly beneath the glass. He used to tap it when he was thinking. I could still hear the sound in my head: tap, 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 like a metronome pacing his words. Underneath the watch was a photograph, the edges curled. In it, I was 15, awkward and quiet, standing next to Malcolm in front of his beach house. We both had wet hair and sunburns, holding melting popsicles like war trophies. He had his arm around my shoulder. I didn't even remember the photo being taken. There was a sticky note on the back. Time belongs to those who don't waste it trying to be someone else. Live your own clock. D. I set the photo down carefully. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony, the city humming below me, and thought about the weight of everything I'd just inherited. It wasn't just money, it was a kind of responsibility. A correction of a story I had once believed was written in stone. But that night, my phone lit up with a text. Then another. And another. Brady. What did you do to him? He was old and sick, easy to manipulate. Aunt Lorraine. You should come clean before we involve a lawyer. Cousin Lindsay. This is a joke. Right. Please tell me he didn't actually give you the publishing rights. They all said the same thing in different words. They thought this was a trick, a scam. They couldn't imagine a world where I deserved what I got. I didn't reply. Not to any of them. Instead, I pulled out Malcolm's notebook, the one he'd given me quietly, without a word, the last time I saw him. It was filled with scribbles, half-formed stories, and notes in the margins. But in the back, written across 3 full pages in his familiar sharp handwriting, were letters, one to each member of the family. He never sent them, but they were raw and honest. One line stuck with me. If you measured a man by how many chairs are full at his funeral, you'd miss the weight of the one who stayed behind and held his hand. I'd held his hand. No cameras, no one to witness. Just me and a dying man who hadn't asked for forgiveness, only presence. The next day, I went to the Cape May house. It took 4 hours to drive, and I didn't stop for food or rest. I needed to see it, to feel if this was real. The house sat quiet at the edge of the dunes, weathered white paint, a wraparound porch with creaky steps, and a porch swing that still moved in the ocean breeze. I hadn't been there in nearly 10 years. I used the old key Malcolm had mailed me 2 summers ago. No note, no explanation. At the time, I thought he was just being eccentric. Now I understood. He'd been preparing for this. Inside, nothing had changed. The old record player in the corner, the surfboard leaning against the fireplace, and on the mantel, A photograph of me and him from the hospice, he in his bathrobe, me in a wrinkled hoodie, both laughing. He must have printed it after I left. I stared at it for a long time. Then I heard the knock. 3 taps. Tentative. I opened the door and found Brady standing there, wearing sunglasses he didn't need and a smirk that looked like it hurt to hold up. "Nice place," he said, stepping in without invitation. Nicer than I remembered. I didn't say anything. I waited. He looked around, hands in his pockets. "So this is what he gave you? All of it?" "Yes." He let out a long whistle. He really hated us. "Huh, no," I said. Finally. He just remembered who showed up when it mattered. Brady laughed, bitter and cracked. "Come on, Daniel. You weren't even close with him growing up. You were the weird cousin, the one who brought books to family parties and didn't talk to anyone." I nodded. "That's true." He squinted at me, confused. Then why I stepped past him, out onto the porch, motioning for him to follow. We stood there, the ocean stretching wide in front of us, the sun heavy over the water. "He told me once," I said, "that real family isn't about blood. It's about who listens when you speak softly." You all only listened when he shouted. Brady was quiet for a second. Then he laughed again. Meaner this time. "You think you're better than us now? Because you got lucky." "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending I wasn't enough." He turned and walked off the porch, muttering something I couldn't hear. He didn't say goodbye. I watched his car drive off, tires kicking up sand and silence. I stayed in Cape May that week, cleaned the house, went through Malcolm's files, talked with the attorney about the business shares and donations he'd wanted to make posthumously. There were instructions to fund a literacy program in his name, to anonymously donate to the hospice center, and to quietly pay the medical debts of 3 patients Malcolm had met during his stay. He hadn't told anyone. He didn't need applause, just results. I honored all of it. The days passed slowly, but I wasn't lonely. I began to understand why Malcolm had loved this place. The isolation wasn't empty, it was peaceful. There was no need to perform, no masks to wear. The family tried to contact me again. Letters, emails, even a voicemail from Aunt Lorraine, sounding more fragile than before. I didn't delete it. I just didn't respond. Not yet. Some bridges aren't burned. They're just standing too far apart for now. One morning, I found a small locked drawer in Malcolm's study desk. The key was taped beneath the top drawer, as if he knew someone like me would look there. Inside was a flash drive and a single line scribbled on a yellow post-it. "If you ever doubt yourself again, watch this." I plugged it into my laptop, breath held tight. The file was a video. Malcolm, in a hospital bed, frail but alert, looking straight into the camera. "Daniel," he said, voice thin but warm. "If you're seeing this, it means I did what I should have done while I was alive. I gave everything to the one person who never asked for it." He smiled. "They'll say you tricked me. Let them. They never saw you. But I did. I always did." I hit pause and let the tears come silently, not out of grief, out of release. I stayed up that night with Malcolm's voice still echoing in the room, in my chest, in the spaces between what I used to believe and what was now undeniably real. I let the video play to the end. Once. Then again. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed the sound of someone believing in me. The next morning, I walked barefoot out to the edge of the beach. The air was sharp, cool with that salt-hung breeze that always made Malcolm's house smell like memory. The sky was cloudless. The horizon felt like it had no end. I stood there, toes buried in damp sand, and let the ocean speak. In that silence, the phone buzzed again. A message. Aunt Lorraine, your mother would be ashamed of what you're doing. I turned the screen off without reading the rest. That line didn't deserve power. My mother, Malcolm's cousin and once his closest friend, had passed nearly a decade ago. A quiet woman, never confrontational, but always watching. I remembered her voice never loud, always steady. She'd been the one to bring me to this house for the first time, tugging me by the hand while the others stayed back. She used to say, "People who talk the loudest are usually afraid of being truly seen." Maybe that was why the others hated silence so much, because silence made them face what they'd avoided. Later that afternoon, I began packing. I didn't want to move into the beach house permanently. It was too sacred, too still. I needed to return to the city, to my real life. But first, I stopped by the hospice. The nurses still remembered me. Some smiled, some nodded in that slow, sad way people do when they've spent years watching people say goodbye. Mrs. Jennings was there, folding linens. She looked up and easy, you know, but he changed when you came around. He stopped fighting the nurses so much, started asking about books again. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. As I walked out, I passed room 214, his room. The door was open now, freshly made bed, soft light pooling onto the floor. It smelled like lemon disinfectant and thyme. I paused, then stepped inside. The room was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe grief had just made everything feel wider back then. I stood in the center, looking out the window he used to stare through, and whispered, "Thank you." Then I left. Back in the city, I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. I didn't throw a party. I didn't change apartments. I didn't buy a new car. I went back to my small routines, teaching part-time at the community center, helping edit manuscripts for struggling authors, volunteering on Saturdays at the library, the things I'd done when I had nothing and still wanted to give. What changed wasn't the outside. It was that I no longer walked with my head tilted down. And still, the calls kept coming. "Brady again. We need to talk. The family's meeting this weekend. You should come." No apology, just expectation. I waited 2 days before answering. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." The family meeting was held in Lorraine's house, the same one where I used to sit quietly in the corner at Christmas, counting the minutes until I could leave. Nothing had changed. Same floral couches, same glass coffee table with fingerprints from children no one watched. Everyone was there. Brady, Lorraine, Joel, even Lindsay, who lived in another state but apparently thought this was worth the flight. They didn't hug me, didn't offer tea. I sat. Lorraine began. "Of course, Daniel, we're not here to attack you. We just want to understand." I smiled lightly. Understand what she looked flustered. How Malcolm came to leave everything to you. It's unprecedented. Brady leaned forward, hands steepled like he was in a negotiation. "We've spoken with a few lawyers. There's not much we can do legally, but ethically, it doesn't sit right. You weren't in the trenches with us, Daniel. You weren't at family reunions. You weren't there when his mother died. You didn't even invite him to your graduation. That last line cut. I hadn't invited anyone. Not because I didn't care, but because no one had ever asked if I was graduating in the first place. I didn't know I was supposed to audition for love, I said quietly. Joel rolled his eyes. We're not trying to guilt you. We're just saying you've got more now than you can possibly need. And there it was. The real reason? I didn't ask for any of this. I replied. Malcolm gave it. He trusted me to handle it. And I've done what he asked. Brady's voice cracked with frustration. Then do one more thing. Share it. Even just part of it. Split the publishing stake. Give Lorraine the house. Give Lindsay the stock. Something. Anything. I looked around the room. Not one of them had asked how I was doing. Not one of them had mentioned Malcolm's name with anything like sorrow. I'll think about it, I said, which was true, but not the way they hoped, because generosity meant nothing if it was demanded like a debt. I left shortly after. No one followed me to the door. That night, I sat with Malcolm's old watch ticking on the windowsill. I opened his notebook again, rereading the scrawled entries and story fragments. Then I flipped to a page I hadn't noticed before. Near the back, a list. At the top, if Daniel ever doubts himself, remind him. Underneath were lines like, he stayed when it was hardest. He never asked for praise. He listened without trying to fix. He gave me dignity when no one else would. I closed the book and wept, not out of grief, but out of recognition. The boy I used to be, the one who sat in corners, who was left off guest lists, who spoke softly so as not to be a burden, had finally been heard. Weeks passed, and life didn't get louder, it got clearer. With the inheritance settled and the storm of my relatives' accusations behind me, I didn't run out to prove anything. I didn't buy a car that roared or post about my new success like I was suddenly someone. I kept doing what I was doing, editing manuscripts for underfunded writers, mentoring high school kids who reminded me too much of myself, and walking the long way home just to listen to the rhythm of the city. One afternoon, while restocking shelves at the library where I volunteered, I noticed a familiar name on the spine of a dusty book, The Blue-Eyed Tree. It was Malcolm's first published story, a surreal fable about a boy who couldn't cry and a tree that did it for him. No one ever talked about it at family gatherings. They only mentioned his wealth, his company, his cleverness. But the book was him, raw and gentle. I checked it out and carried it home like a gift. I didn't realize until later that evening, flipping through its yellowed pages, that he'd left a note in the back cover, in pencil, almost faded. For the person who knows that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means roots. That night, I received an unexpected email. It was from a literary agent. She said Malcolm had submitted a manuscript shortly before he passed, under a pseudonym. It was experimental, strange, philosophical. She thought it had potential, but what caught her attention was the final dedication. It read, "For DM, the only one who ever read between the silences." The agent wanted to publish it, but said Malcolm's estate needed to grant permission. I replied the same night, yes, but only if we list his real name, and only if the proceeds go to the hospice and youth writing programs. I didn't want royalties. I wanted his voice to echo louder than his bank account ever did. When the book was published 6 months later, it didn't top bestseller charts. It didn't make headlines, but it reached the right people. Emails trickled in from readers who said it felt like Malcolm had written straight to the wounds they'd never admitted out loud. One woman wrote, "I read this while caring for my dying father. I didn't feel so alone anymore." Another said, "This book made me want to call my brother for the first time in years. That meant more than any check could." And then, one cold Tuesday morning, I got a letter in the mail. Real mail. Stamped. Handwritten. The envelope was pale blue, the kind you buy in specialty bookstores. It was from Lindsay. She wrote, "I won't lie. I was furious. I didn't understand. Still don't. But after reading Malcolm's book, I see something I didn't before. You. I see you. And I realize we all should have done that earlier. I don't know how to undo what's been said, but I'd like to talk. No money. No favors. Just talk. Maybe that's a start." I folded the letter and held it in my lap for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and texted her. "Me next Wednesday. Coffee. 11 a.m. The cafe near 6th and Pine. If you're there, I will be too." She replied with a single word. "Okay." That meeting was quiet, a little awkward, but not cold. She asked questions, real ones. I answered honestly. We didn't solve the family's broken history in an hour, but we started stitching something small. Later that day, I walked to the Cape May house again mentally, not physically. I closed my eyes on the subway ride home and imagined the boards creaking beneath my feet, the salt in the air, the way Malcolm used to sit with his knees drawn up on the porch swing, humming a tune no one recognized. I thought of the photo on the mantel and wondered if one day I'd leave a house to someone who wasn't expecting it. Someone like me. The publishing firm Malcolm had partial shares in reached out with another offer. They wanted me to join their advisory board. I almost laughed. Me, on a board I'd barely survived Christmas dinners without being told I'd fallen behind in life. But I said yes. Not because I needed the status, but because I wanted to protect voices like Malcolm's. Quiet. Strange. Honest. In the months that followed, I began funding programs without attaching my name. A small scholarship for late bloomers in writing programs. A grant for hospice volunteers who worked more hours than they were paid. And one donation, anonymous, to Aunt Lorraine's church food drive because grace doesn't have to come with applause. The rest of the family faded into a kind of quiet acknowledgement. They didn't accept me as a new patriarch or hero. But the angry messages stopped. Brady never called again. Joel sent a stiff email thanking me for respecting the family's privacy. I didn't reply. That was the answer. One Saturday, walking through the park, I passed a young boy sitting alone on a bench with a book in his lap. He looked about 10. He was crying softly, not dramatically, and his backpack had spilled open. Books everywhere, no parent in sight. I sat on the bench beside him, not too close. After a moment, I handed him a tissue from my pocket. He wiped his nose and said, "Everyone laughs because I read too much." I smiled. "Then maybe they just don't read enough." He blinked. "You think I nodded. I used to be like you." He looked at me, skeptical. "But you're old." I laughed. Real and full. Exactly. I helped him gather his books. As he walked away, I slipped a small folded note into one of them. Inside was a message. Time belongs to those who don't waste it trying to be someone else. It wasn't mine. But I think Malcolm would have wanted it passed on. That night, I returned home and placed the old watch back in its box. The tick had grown softer. Maybe from the salt air or maybe from age, but it still ticked. Time. Quiet and unstoppable. I didn't need to wear it anymore. I knew what time it was. I was home. In my own story. No longer waiting for someone else to give me a name. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of being seen. Spring came slowly that year, with long rains and tulips that seemed to emerge reluctantly, like they were still deciding whether the world was worth blooming into. I found myself noticing small things more, how the library's windows fogged in the mornings, how the mailman smiled with the left side of his mouth only, how the kid from the bench in the park came back every Saturday, book in hand, sitting taller now, sometimes waving when he saw me. Life had become a kind of rhythm, not grand, not dramatic, but full. I kept my part-time teaching job, still edited manuscripts for struggling writers, those ones that smelled more like truth than anything that came from the top of a bestseller list. I didn't wear expensive shoes or carry luxury pens, but I paid the rent for 3 single mothers whose stories I'd edited in the past. Quietly. No receipts. No thanks needed. Malcolm's house in Cape May remained untouched. I visited once every 2 months, cleaned it, replaced flowers in the vase by the photo, made sure the wood didn't rot, and the porch swing didn't rust. Sometimes I just sat there for hours, notebook in hand, writing lines that might never become anything but were mine nonetheless. One afternoon in May, I received a small package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a copy of Malcolm's posthumously published manuscript, The Sea Between Voices, translated into Japanese. A sticky note was attached. Found this in a Tokyo bookstore. Thought you'd want to know he made it that far. L? I smiled. Lindsay and I had kept in touch since that first awkward coffee. Slowly, deliberately. She never asked for anything, never hinted. She just wanted to understand. And I let her. Some weeks we exchanged articles, other times just lines from books that reminded us of family we used to be afraid of confronting. In one message, she wrote, "I don't think we're supposed to fix the past, just not repeat it." She was right. In early June, I was invited to speak at a small writers' retreat. The theme was late bloomers, long shadows, a perfect fit. I almost declined. I hadn't spoken publicly since college, but Malcolm's voice played again in my head. He stopped hiding when it mattered. So I said yes. The event was held in a renovated barn near the Hudson Valley, with fairy lights and too much coffee. My session was the last of the day. They wanted me to talk about legacy, about unexpected inheritance. I stood in front of 40 faces, some young, some weathered, holding a crumpled note card I never ended up using. I'm not here because I succeeded. I began. I'm here because someone saw me when I thought I was invisible, and that changed everything. I told them about Malcolm, about the envelope, about the silence in the room when the truth unfolded. But more than that, I said, I want you to understand something being overlooked doesn't mean you were wrong. It just means your moment hasn't arrived yet. And sometimes, when it finally does, you won't even need it the way you once did. The room stayed silent, not the kind that says boredom, but the kind that says something has landed. Afterward, a woman with gray streaks in her curls came up to me and said, I was the youngest of 6. I never even had my own chair at the table. Tonight was the first time I felt like I deserved to sit down. We hugged, not performatively, just honestly. Back in the city, the small boy from the bench. His name was Aaron. I finally invited me to his school's open poetry night. His mom emailed me the invitation. He said, "You're his book friend." I hope that's okay. I laughed out loud when I read that. And of course I went. The auditorium was too big for the event, like most school events are. Half the mic didn't work. The projector glitched. But Aaron stood on that stage, hair still sticking up at the back, and read a poem titled The Man with the Watch. It was about time, and kindness, and quiet things that grow louder when you stop trying to shout. When he walked off stage, he gave me a thumbs up from the wings. I returned it. On the train ride home that night, I saw my reflection in the window. I looked calm, not victorious, just whole. For years, I had studied the lines of my face, wondering when I'd finally grow into something people respected. But now, I didn't need respect to be handed to me. I had given it to myself, and that was more enduring. Sometime in late July, I received a letter from the firm managing Malcolm's investments. They'd just discovered another account, one that had been dormant for years. It had been intended for a future project. A trust fund labeled, "For the Next Invisible Boy." I stared at the screen. A week later, I started a foundation. No offices, no gala fundraisers, just a mission to find the ones who are overlooked, the ones in foster homes, halfway houses, forgotten neighborhoods, and give them books, notebooks, scholarships, something to say. You are not lost. The foundation was small, but real. Each applicant received a handwritten note, some from me, some from Lindsay, who volunteered to help, one from Aaron, who signed his, from someone who knows how it feels. Years passed, and still, I never changed the name on my mailbox. I didn't upgrade to marble countertops, didn't invest in my personal brand. What I inherited wasn't meant to elevate me above others. It was meant to pull up the ones no one else would touch. I visited Malcolm's house one last time before selling it, not to a developer, but to a quiet woman who ran grief-writing retreats for cancer survivors. She promised to keep the porch swing. I believed her. Before I locked the door that final time, I left the old watch on the mantel, still ticking, still Malcolm's. It belonged there, not on my wrist. As I closed the door behind me, I whispered, "I hope you know what you started." Then I stepped out into the light, not to chase approval, not to finish someone else's story, but to live mine. No longer the cousin in the background, no longer the afterthought, just Daniel Mercer. And that was enough.